Your money is either working for you or working against you. The difference comes down to one decision. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Americans collectively owe $18.8 trillion in household debt as of the end of 2025, and the average household is carrying right around $105,000 in total debt. That is not a small number. Here is what makes that number so striking. Most of that debt did not come from emergencies. It came from choices, often well-intentioned ones. A car upgrade here, a furniture purchase there, a few too many months of leaning on credit cards. Each of those decisions felt reasonable in the moment, but added together, they created something that quietly pulls in the opposite direction of everything you are trying to build. Robert Kiyosaki introduced a simple but powerful distinction in his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it is worth restating clearly before we go further. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. That is it. No jargon, no complexity. The problem is that most of us were never taught to see the world through that filter before we started making real financial decisions. And by the time someone explains it to us, we are already carrying the weight of purchases we thought were building us up. What makes this even harder is that our brains are not wired to help us here. Behavioral economists call it social comparison bias, the automatic, largely unconscious tendency to evaluate our own choices based on what the people around us appear to have. You see a neighbor pull into their driveway in a brand new truck, and suddenly your perfectly functional car feels like a problem to solve. You see a coworker remodel their kitchen, and the countertops you have lived with for 5 years start to look embarrassing. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist behind prospect theory, spent decades studying how these mental shortcuts shape our decisions. His research showed that we do not evaluate things in isolation. We evaluate them relative to a reference point. And when that reference point is constantly being reset by what we see around us, we keep spending to keep up with a moving target. What that actually means for your bank account is this. You are often buying things not because you genuinely want them, but because your brain is running a comparison program in the background. And the comparison program almost always concludes that you need more. This is not a character flaw. It is just how human wiring works. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Morgan Housel, author of The Psychology of Money and his more recent work, The Art of Spending Money, makes a point that cuts right to the core of this. He writes that wealth is the gap between your ego and your income. Think about that for a second. If your ego says you should be living at a certain level and your income cannot comfortably sustain it, the gap gets filled with debt. And debt, in most forms, is a liability. It takes money out of your pocket every single month in the form of interest, minimum payments, and compounding balances. Credit card annual percentage rates in mid-2025 were averaging between 22 and 24%. If you are carrying even a modest balance at that rate, you are not just spending money on what you bought, you are continuously paying a premium for the privilege of having bought it. Every month you carry that balance is a month your money flows toward a lender instead of toward you. Here's the thing most people miss about the asset versus liability framework. It is not really about frugality. It is not about depriving yourself of things you enjoy. The question to ask before any major purchase is simply, does this thing I am about to buy generate anything, or does it only cost? A car that gets you to a job that earns you income is arguably functional, even if it depreciates. But a car payment that stretches to 60 or 72 months on a vehicle loaded with options you did not need, at a loan rate that adds thousands to the total, that is a liability masquerading as a necessity. There is a psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, and researchers at BMC Psychology published work in 2024 confirming what many behavioral economists have suspected for years, that the positive emotional boost from a consumer purchase fades quickly and reliably. In fact, their research on nearly 3,000 participants showed that people return to their baseline level of well-being not long after making a purchase. Your brain adjusts. The new thing becomes normal. And then the cycle starts over, with the next thing promising to feel different. This is not speculation. It is a documented pattern. And it is the engine that keeps people spending on things that deliver temporary satisfaction, while their balance sheets steadily move in the wrong direction. The modern update to the rich dad rule is this. You do not have to be wealthy to start buying assets, and you do not have to be poor to fall into the liability trap. Income is not the deciding factor here. Behavior is. Ronald Reed, a janitor and gas station attendant from Vermont, died with a net worth of $8 million. He never earned a high salary. He spent modestly and patiently directed money toward assets, specifically stocks in companies he understood, and then left time to do its work. His story is not mythological, it is documented. Housel tells it in The Psychology of Money precisely because it demolishes the comfortable excuse that wealth building is only available to people who earn more. The clearest self-sabotaging pattern to avoid is what you might call the status purchase spiral. It goes like this. You buy something visible, something other people can see, to signal that you are doing well. The car, the renovation, the wardrobe upgrade. For a brief window, it works. People notice. You feel the social reward. And then hedonic adaptation kicks in. The signal fades, and the next purchase is already forming in the back of your mind. Meanwhile, the interest accumulates. The minimum payments shrink your monthly cash flow, and the things that actually build wealth, index funds, rental income, a business you are slowly building, stay on the back burner because there is no money left to direct toward them. Now let's get concrete, because this is where behavior actually changes. This week, before you make any purchase over $200, run it through what I call the 3-question filter. First, does this thing put money in my pocket, or does it only take money out? Second, in 12 months, will I still feel I needed this, or will it be another thing I barely notice anymore? Third, if I invested this money instead, what would it look like in 10 years? That last question is not rhetorical. At a historically reasonable 8% average annual return in a diversified index fund, $200 invested today becomes roughly $430 in 10 years. $500 becomes over $1,000. These are not exciting numbers on their own. But when you run the filter consistently, over months and years, the cumulative difference between the liability-buying version of you and the asset-buying version of you becomes enormous. The next step after the 3-question filter is even simpler. Open a separate investment account this week, whether it is a Roth IRA, a brokerage account, or even just a high-yield savings account, and set up an automatic transfer of any amount you can start with. $25, $50, whatever you can commit to without feeling it in your day-to-day life. The automation is critical because it removes the decision from your monthly routine. You are no longer choosing each month whether to invest. It just happens, and because it happens before your spending can absorb it, the asset-building side of your financial life starts to grow quietly in the background. That is the real modernization of the rich dad rule. It is not about becoming obsessive or swearing off everything enjoyable. It is about building a simple, automated system that consistently routes money toward things that work for you, before your brain has time to find something to spend it on. The behavior has to come first. The mindset follows once you start seeing your asset column actually move. Every dollar you direct toward an asset instead of a liability is a dollar that begins generating something. Future options, future income, future flexibility. Every dollar that stays in a liability is a dollar that quietly shrinks over time, while the thing it bought slowly loses value. The single most important shift is learning to see money not as a tool for displaying where you are, but as a tool for getting you where you want to go. Those are two very different destinations, and the purchases you make today are already choosing one of them for you. If that idea resonates with you, Next Gen Finance exists to give you the research-backed frameworks and practical tools that make it easier to act on. Subscribing means you will have access to a growing library of financial content built around the psychology and habits behind real wealth building, not generic tips, but the deeper behavioral insights that actually change how you relate to money. I want to ask you something specific in the comments. When you think about your last major purchase, was it an asset, a liability, or honestly a little of both? And did you run any kind of filter before buying it, or did it just feel right in the moment? I read every comment, and the more honest your answer, the more useful it is for everyone watching. Your experience matters here. This video is for educational purposes only and is not financial or investment advice. Please do your own research and consult a licensed financial professional before making any financial decisions.